So there's one habit that I've picked up over the last 12 or so months that has dramatically increased the success rate of my street photography. This habit or technique, whatever you want to call it, has increased my chances of actually getting some keepers or at least some decent shots rather than coming home empty-handed. However, I do think it's important to know that you can't guarantee a successful day of street photography, ever. Life on the streets certainly doesn't serve you up a collection of photos ready for a photo gallery in 1 week, but the unpredictability of street photography is part of the reason why it's so special. I think you understand my point and I don't want to waffle on too much further, so I want to share a very practical tip that will at least increase your chances of noticing a photo opportunity. The first way I want to explain this is by showing you a clip from London street photographer Matt Stuart. He was talking at one of his galleries and he said something very specific which I think we can all take note of.
Yeah, and this was lucky, but you have to be out there. I was going to say, one of the things that I think is important with street photography is to have triggers in your head, like things that you respond to. So maybe you respond to, you always respond to animals. I respond to people yawning. I respond to the color red, and I respond to people's hands. So throughout these pictures the whole time, there's things that I respond to, triggers.
So what Matt just said there is essentially the entire process for finding those photography opportunities. What are your triggers? Having these triggers in the back of your mind is the difference between walking away with photos, or at least noticing photo opportunities, and walking around aimlessly with no purpose. I think it's important to remember that every individual finds different things interesting. So to get a range of ideas, I asked a couple of street photography friends, what are your triggers? What catches your eye? So I want to share some clips now for some people that share some very similar triggers, but they all have different styles. So let's listen to what they have to say.
For me, it's a good source of light, and just good light in general. Whenever I'm walking around the city, the first thing I look for is light. If there's no light, I'll generally not be very interested. However, if there's an amazing source of light or just a pocket of light, I'll go straight there to investigate and then see if I can make a picture out of whatever the light source, the composition, the potential subjects, and all of that is. So the most important thing that catches my eye and triggers me to go and investigate is light.
I think there are two for me. I love to look for reflections, playing with how two separate moments can interact. Reflections allow me to manipulate the scene in camera, adding additional layers of story to my photographs. And the second is connections. People holding hands, a subtle look between two friends. I'm really drawn to these small moments that are easy to overlook and often feel like quiet details in the hectic nature of city life.
When it comes to triggers when I'm out on the street, I think three immediately come to mind. So the first one, which is my most common one, would be actions. So for me, if anything out of the ordinary happens, it can be a gesture, it can be maybe an embrace as people meet coming out of the train station, it can maybe even be a fight on the street, something like this. These are the first things that jump out to me when I'm walking around. I think my second trigger would be colour. So this could be an abundance of one colour, maybe like I could see lots of yellows on an area, lots of reds. Red comes up a lot in London quite often. Or even a very reduced colour palette. And my third one, which is the rarest and also my favourite, I would call separation. So here's when you're walking through town, you come across a scene where there's lots of people, but they're all nicely separated. Hopefully there's also something interesting happening. So having all of this happening at one time is quite rare, but when you do find it, this is exactly the kind of photos that I enjoy looking at.
Well, this is exactly what I look for when I shoot street. I love that harsh light offering contrasts to this level where it creates interesting shadows, creates a new dynamic for me. A different world to shoot in. I find it incredibly interesting. You can use shadows to frame subjects. You can use shadows to make your shot far more interesting. That aside, if there's not this harsh light, then I pretty much look for anything that takes my interest and I think is cool. As an individual, I look for what I individually find interesting. That's the best way to do it, in my opinion.
Thank you to those guys for sharing some wisdom, and hopefully that gave you some food for thought. I will link all their details below. Some of my personal favourites that I've been keeping an eye on recently are hats, billboards and posters, primary colours and gestures. If possible, within those scenes, I will also try and bring a sense of humour to the composition, like this water fountain just bursting out of the top of this guy's head, or this woman's hand booping this guy's nose. And if a composition can make me smile, I will try and capture that. Now, it is easy for me to sit here and make a list of make-believe situations, but it's all about how life plays out in front of you. And so to increase our chances of spotting these interactions and these unique moments, it all comes down to making sure you're actually out there in the first place. The best photos, in my opinion, come from incredible observation skills, but that's not the entire truth. Some photographers might not like what I'm about to say, but I feel like just being honest will benefit more people in the long run. Let's take this image for example, a guy with a megaphone on Oxford Street. This perfect theme of red and white runs very nicely through the image. Now, did I use my exceptional observational skills to capture that image? The answer is no. I used an initial trigger, which this guy was moving around, he was loud, he was pointing. I thought, okay, there's probably going to be an interesting scene here. I didn't know that the red and white photo would align as it did, but after like 35 images, I just kind of spammed the scene. I ended up noticing the photo when I opened the image up in Lightroom after. So I wasn't walking into that situation knowing I was going to get that image. And quite frankly, I got lucky with the fact that the red and white people, the clothes and the colours worked out. My point here isn't to have picture perfect observational skills. All you need is one trigger, whether it's the colour red, hand gestures, a certain light that hits the scene. Once something has your attention, it's all down to the individual yourself to how you work the scene to get the result that you're happy with. So back to my original point, having those triggers in the back of your mind is the difference between noticing photos and walking right by them.